Hi everyone, and a video for the first week of Islam, and uh, perhaps to help us make the switch over between Christianity and Islam. Obviously, like Judaism, it's one of the Abrahamic traditions, so there's a parallel, and they all draw on the Bible to some extent. So there's a relationship between them, obviously, which you'll be learning all about this week. What I wanted to say, though, is that while the contrast with Christianity for me is that for many of us, not all of us, but we are going through the 2 weeks of Christianity, and we've got an experience of it probably from the inside. We have some experience of the religion of Christianity in our own lives. So there's a very different relationship to it. In this case, sometimes, though not always, but often a kind of a somewhat negative attitude towards Christianity from the experience within it. With Islam, it's kind of the opposite way around. Not many of us have an experience of Islam from the inside. We all experience it from the outside, and we may have negative thoughts about Islam from that perspective, from the perspective of the outside. And so what I want to suggest, and you'll get a taste of it from the Smith textbook this week, but what I want to suggest is that to keep our minds as open as possible, our minds and hearts actually as open as possible to Islam, and allow that it perhaps might not be what it has seemed to us to be. It might be quite other, or more profound, and worthy of consideration, worthy of openness, than we might have thought. I'm not saying that we have judged it, but many in our culture have. We have a certain impression of it. And I wanted to speak about one of the impressions of Islam, which is that it's extremely patriarchal. Obviously, we have that in Christianity too, but we might particularly think that's the case with Islam because of from the outside, an obvious different treatment of women. And so it's treatment of the feminine, treatment of women, would be one of those ways which we might judge Islam. And I think that actually is probably legitimate in the current age. But that has to do with what Islam has become, and not to do with what Islam is. And I'm going to be sending you some articles on the feminine in Islam, and there might be some surprising things about the feminine in Islam, in that at its inception, the early stages of Islam, it was basically a vehicle for the liberation of women, actually. And the feminine was greatly revered early on, apparently. And that a generation or two after Muhammad, after the death of Muhammad, a kind of patriarchal overlay or slant started to take hold, and that has become extremely strong, ingrained over the years. And this actually was predicted by Muhammad, or something like it was predicted by Muhammad, so that Islam, in some ways, you might say, was sort of hijacked. Perhaps it was necessary, I don't know. But it's not what Islam appears to be from the outside today is not what Islam is at heart. Islam, I find to be an extremely beautiful religion, tradition, and in some ways more accessible than Christianity is to me. However, having said that, it's difficult, I think, for us to really access Islam if you don't have a knowledge of Arabic, the language, because it's perhaps more so than any other religion that we'll study. It's very dependent on the original language. Reciting the Quran in Arabic is supposed to have effects that we can only imagine. There is somewhat of an analogy to Hinduism and Sanskrit. You've perhaps all experienced Sanskrit chanting, and Sanskrit is supposed to have its own kind of power. Well, the sort of poetic nature of Arabic is it's a similar kind of idea, I suppose, that Islam is really revealed, really enhanced by its language. Most of us will never have access to that, and so we won't know. So we're going to have to rely different kinds of ways in. And Smith will try to help us, and perhaps some of the writings of Rumi and other poets, when we get through to the mystical parts of Islam, will help us even more so. We'll get a sense of what Arabic, the beauty of Arabic, through the beauty of even the translations of these poems. So I'm just suggesting that we try to stay open to Islam, to the beauty of Islam. I do think it really does have beauty, and it's going to be an interesting practice next week that we'll do, and I hope you enjoy it. I really enjoy the practice that we'll do, actually. And anyway, so I hope you have a good week reading it. By the way, I wanted to compliment all of you on the discussion that we had on the second week of Christianity that revolves around asceticism, Christian mysticism and asceticism. Those discussions were just wonderful, sort of in-depth, rich, really drawing on our feelings, very, very true. I think it was a very worthwhile discussion, a good dialogue. So thank you all for the depth of your posts and sharing.